I held on, not realizing that it wasn't going to get any better anytime soon. It was going to get worse. I ultimately had to file bankruptcy, and I messed up 2 businesses in the process of trying to save one. I had a wife and I had kids, but I spent a lot of time on the streets. I definitely regret that. I didn't spend more time with my kids growing up. So now for the first time, I'm at a place where I'm literally looking at myself and saying, man, I've lost everything. I remember when I bought my first house, I didn't have money for a refrigerator. So I bought another house when I was 27. Now here I am at 44 years old and I have nothing.
In the movie Kingsman, The Secret Service, it was said that a suit is the modern gentleman's armor. And if that's true, then there's no one better at preparing a man for battle, whether it's in the boardroom, at the altar, or on the red carpet, than Miguel Wilson. Miguel takes immense pride in ensuring that every man who wears his suits exudes confidence, power, and presence. His skill speaks for itself. Just ask 2 Chainz, who famously rapped, "I got the suit from Miguel, I know it fit me well."
I got the suit from Miguel, I know it fit me well.
But while fashion was always destined to be a part of Miguel's life, it was another passion that may have ultimately saved it.
The change happened when I realized that I was living a lie. And for me, I am a person that leaves revenge to God. Time after time after time after time, God has always restored me to a place better than I could have had I acted on my own.
Thank you for tuning in to Give 'Em the Business. If you enjoy learning from Black entrepreneurs and business leaders about their stories of adversity and success, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. But more importantly, please share it with your friends because your endorsement is what matters the most. On today's episode, we have Miguel Wilson, founder of the Miguel Wilson Collection clothing line. He has stores in New York, DC, Miami, and Atlanta. I hope you enjoy our conversation where he shares his journey. Thank you for joining another episode of Give 'Em the Business. I'm your host, Troy Evans, and on today's episode, we have a good friend of mine, the founder of the Miguel Wilson Collection, Mr. Miguel Wilson himself. How you doing, brother?
Hey, Troy, thank you so much for having me.
So, Miguel, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show is because when I met you in Anguilla and we were sitting next to each other having dinner, your wife, my wife, and what have you, you mentioned your black Polo classic. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, wow, what a coincidence, because it's not that many Black people in the horse adjacent business. Mm-hmm. And my wife happened to have been in the thoroughbred business. And I said, wow, we heard about your event. Mm-hmm. And here we are sitting next to you having dinner in another country.
All the way in Anguilla.
Right. Yeah. All the way in Anguilla. So I just thought, man, you got to be one of the most interesting men in the world. And I wanted to make sure I told your story. So let's start with actually how you developed that love of horses and growing up in Washington, D.C.
As a kid, I went to a camp, and it was called Camp Wamava. It was in Virginia. And it was a Christian camp, but they happened to have horses there. And that was my first time really being exposed to horses, but there were 3 horses they had. They had a thoroughbred, or maybe a quarter horse, thoroughbred. Her name was Misty. There was a pinto named Reno, and there was a pony named Peanut. And, I just say those names to show at 58 years old how significant those horses were to me at 8 years old. And I went home, and all I talked about was horses. I was just everything was horses to me. I wanted to be around them, but of course, growing up in Washington, D.C., we didn't have any horses in my neighborhood. So I would just read books, every book in a library about horses. And my great-grandmother, understanding my passion for it at that point, invested in that. She paid for me to take some riding lessons. And it wasn't until she passed away that I realized just how big of a sacrifice that was for her, because she only made like $11,000 a year. But being around horses exposed me to so much, particularly different people. I growing up in Washington D.C. during that time, it was Chocolate City, so it was all black. I went to school with all black kids. My whole neighborhood was all black kids. I didn't know of any people of any other culture. So going out to that barn where I took the riding lessons was really my first exposure to being around white kids. And, just I think back on that time was a great time being able to, number one, get away from D.C. because my lessons were in Maryland. And it was very therapeutic just to drive out there, seeing the change in scenery, the trees changing colors, and to seeing trees actually and seeing houses and fences and grass. It was just I didn't realize, but my stress levels were leaving as the further out to that barn I got. And, so it was amazing.
And I know that was that experience of being introduced to horses at such a young age. And I read in your book, you talked about in some ways it saved your life a little bit, right? And it's something that stuck with you throughout your adult life and throughout your career and whatnot. And that's a powerful testament to that relationship. And we're going to come full circle back to where that took you. But what was it like growing up in D.C.? You had your experiences being able to get out of D.C. and into Maryland, but you've had maternal relationships with your great-grandmother, et cetera. What was it like growing up for you there? And what exposure did you have, if any, to the future businessman you would become?
Well, I would tell you this. I think growing up in D.C. taught me a lot from a standpoint of just really being defensive, I guess you could say, man. You leave the house in Washington, somebody's going to definitely try to rob you. Somebody may try to start a fight with you. It was a very tough environment to grow in. It was like, I always reference lions and lambs. I grew up in a neighborhood. You were either a lion or a lamb, and so I started out as a lamb, but I had to turn into a lion to survive. I didn't necessarily like having to fight or like having to, and going out to that barn though was a time where I could relax, let my shoulders down, didn't have to worry about looking over my shoulder. I didn't have to worry about, somebody trying to steal my bike and so, unfortunately, I grew up, I guess, in an environment that really made me feel inferior as a black person because being around black people was just rough and tough and just, always fighting, always this and that. But I go out to the barn with white people and they were all nice and kind. And, it was just, they weren't familiar with the environment I was in. And I was ashamed to even let them know the environment. So I would never talk about home or, and I remember going home from the barn, always like kind of down, but I had something to look forward to the next week. I do see that a lot of kids who did not have that level of exposure, never having to see other ways to live, many fell to the side. I've had friends, go to prison, guys who died, get killed. And, I just feel phenomenally blessed that God chose me to give me that experience to the point that it was life-changing.
And where did that experience take you next when you left Washington?
So the next, I guess, major transformation was, because I didn't think I wanted to go to college, because I, grew up feeling not so smart. And so when I graduated high school, my thing was, man, I'm gonna just be done with that. And it was a conversation I was having with my grandfather one day. We were looking at boxing. And he said, what do you want to do when you graduate? And mind you, this was like 2 months from graduation in 12th grade. And I said, I think I want to become a professional boxer. And going back to your question about the entrepreneurial side, my grandfather had a liquor store. So when I was a teenager, I worked in his liquor store, and he would always tell me, work for yourself. Work for yourself. You know, don't work for nobody. Go work for yourself. And so that was something that I had, you know, I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do, but I just knew entrepreneurship. And even throughout high school, every day I sold candy. You know, so my whole book bag didn't have one book in it. And I just had candy and snacks, and everybody knew me that, you know, when they needed something to eat during school outside of the lunchroom, you can just come to me and buy some snacks and stuff. So I did that pretty much throughout high school. And then I started cutting hair in school. And so I had entrepreneurial, you know, type of mentality, you know, about making money. And so he said to me when I told him I was going to be a boxer, and at the time I had a lawn service too. I was cutting grass for people in the neighborhood. And he said, you should become that boxer. In fact, put your lawn service on the bottom of your shoes. That way when they knock your butt out, you can market your lawn service. And, you know, it's still funny to this day, but the thing was, it was a distraction enough that, you know, I said, well, let me look at some other options, because he didn't believe I could be a pro. So I said, well, you know, another alternative was maybe I might go in the Army. I cut hair. I like cutting hair. So maybe I go in the Army and be a barber. I didn't know. And so he said, man, my grandfather told me a story about how he was in the Air Force and how the officers mistreated him. And, you know, this was probably 40, 50 years removed from being in the military, but I could still hear the pain in his voice about his experience of having to clean toilets and do, you know, menial jobs as a man. That, you know, he said, listen, if you're going to go in the military, you need to go in as an officer. And I had no idea what that meant. But I went to my counselor the next day and asked her. So my grandfather said I need to go in as military as an officer, so sign me up. He said, well, you got to go to college for that. I was like, what? He didn't tell me that part. And, you know, at that point, I just said, you know, I'll give college a try. What the heck? You know, and I remember, you know, I hadn't even taken the SAT. And so I took my SATs after I graduated high school. And I got accepted at Bowie State College at the time for on a conditional acceptance. You know, I had to do well. And that was that whole experience going to college just changed my life, because for the first time, I applied myself in school. I didn't have candy in my backpack. I had books. And I would study, and I was so scared because it's conditional acceptance that I would get kicked out, that I literally worked and did my best. And my best produced, you know, honor roll, dean's list for the first time. So I had the dean's list, and I was like, wow, you know. So for the first time, I saw myself as intelligent, you know, and that was amazing feeling. Then the bondage of stupidity got removed, and I was able to think about things in life in a different way, because now I no longer was limited by my thoughts or by my intelligence. And I was in ROTC and ended up, you know, getting my commission. And my grandfather that day stood there and put my bar. He put one bar on, and another gentleman that was very close to me, and Captain Bozeman, put my other bar on that day. So I was commissioned officer. That was a major accomplishment coming from where I came from.
That's amazing, and I can relate to that experience of exposure and getting a taste of success, and, you know, it kind of taking the blinders off of you and showing you what the opportunities are. When I was in high school, I went to an all-black high school, like 8th, 9th grade, and then my mother got married, and I went to a all-white, very wealthy school.
Mm.
And
your mother married up.
Yeah, she married up. She married up. And so when I went there, the counselor would ask me, how many times am I going to take the SAT? And at my old school, they would ask, are you going to take the SAT?
Mm-hmm.
And just that little difference in phrasing was the difference in me going off to college at Morehouse versus staying at home and things of that nature. So I can relate to what you're talking about, to that exposure and kind of seeing what the opportunities are for yourself. So what did you were in ROTC, what did you study while you were in school?
Business. I'll say this too. I think that's one of the most significant things about me falling in love with horses at a young age was that the only way I could connect with horses outside of being at the barn was through books. So I was a prolific reader of anything and everything I could find about a horse. Not being one to study, not being one to do class schoolwork, not one to do involved in school at all. My only benefit reading, because I became such a prolific reader, and enabled me. That's what enabled me to go to college and do well, because I could read very well. I could comprehend very well. Only through the process of doing that so much from the age of 8. Outside of that, I don't know that I could have been prepared to go to college without doing that. So that was a huge part of my experience that prepared me for college, unlike anything else that I had done.
It's amazing. You never know what's going to spark that interest, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for you, it was horses. So you're studying business, you're in ROTC, and you come out of school and you got to go into the Army.
Yeah, I was a military police officer. I was a reserve officer, so I didn't have to do a lot of time, and I had a 6-year commitment, but it was mostly part-time stuff. So I ended up getting a job. My first corporate job was with Pillsbury Company. And that was an amazing experience for me too, because I was knowingly hired under affirmative action. I think it was like 4 of us that got hired around the same time. It was pretty clear that, we got hired because they were looking for Black people. And it was my first time really being around white people like that. I went to college with Black schools. I went to Bowie State, went to Clark Atlanta, where I graduated. But now was the first time I don't think anything really prepared me for corporate, because, it's just a different environment. So being there, I got to see a lot of things in action and learn a lot about, how life works and really how things happen outside of, academia. And so that was a great experience. But I worked for Pillsbury for 7 years. And then I took a chance on, it's crazy, I had a investment business. A friend, a guy, he played for the Harlem Globetrotters, and he exposed me to some investment trading stuff. Coming to find out, it was a Ponzi scheme. So that almost put me in jail. But I avoided that situation, and I had to get a job again. So I got a job with Marriott. Now, I started playing golf while I was with Pillsbury because, me trying to assimilate to what they did and how they do stuff. I saw that the white guys, had better relationships with the managers and all, because they all played golf together. And so, and honestly, the first time I went out with them was probably one of the most embarrassing days of my life, because I couldn't hit that ball to save my life. And, they all stand around looking at you, and they know that you can't play. And it was just an embarrassing situation. But I told myself, you know what, I'm going to figure this out, because I just can't let them win. And so I took lessons. I invested in some lessons. I invested in some clubs. And, and then the passion for the game came. So I started playing golf. So when the investment thing fell apart, I was playing golf with a friend of mine, and he told me about the opportunity with Pillsbury. No, excuse me, Marriott. And I said, I want the job. So literally 2 days later, I had the job with Marriott, all from playing golf with my friend. Then about, they hired me in this new program they had. It was for, Marriott used to have it to where they had salespeople at each property. I got hired as the first hire that would be a salesperson covering the multiple brands. So I covered the whole area, and I had, Residence Inn, Fairfield Inn, Courtyard, Marriott property. So I had all these different brands I sold. And it was I went to this, and one of the things they needed me to do was sell weekend business, which is hard to do because, who are you selling to for weekends? Because Monday through Friday, they were at 100% occupancy. Weekends, they dropped down to like 2 to 5%. So nobody's in hotels on weekends. And I met this guy, a white guy. He's about 20 years older than me, and he had a putter in his office. I said, "You play golf?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Man, let's go out and play some golf." And so we built a relationship just playing golf together. So one day he tells me, he said, I got a big event coming to town. I'm going to use your hotels. And that, he booked all 7 of my hotels 100% for 2 weeks. That took me to number 1 in the country. Again, another experience from golf that elevated my situation. So I immediately went to my boss and told him that I was leaving, moving to Atlanta. At the time I was in Durham, North Carolina. And he said, well, you only been here, 6 months now, and you had to usually be in your job for at least, I think, 18 months to get a promotion, and particularly to get moved. I said, well, I quit then, because I'm moving to Atlanta. And I guess the powers that be talked, I'm the number 1 salesman in the country, and they didn't want to lose me, so they not only moved me, but gave me a promotion. So I became a director of national accounts here in Atlanta. And I probably had 20-some hotels at that point and took on the luxury brand, which would have been Renaissance. So that was a good job, great experience, but I was here 6 months into that job, and I had a contract for at least 1 year because they paid for my move. They spent all this money. They said, you got to stay with us at least a year. But after 6 months, I was just ready to go. I was ready to just do clothes full time. At this point, I had been doing clothes part time for 7 years. So I went to my boss, said, listen, and I know in 6 months my contract will be up, and I just want to let you know now, I will not be renewing. I'm going to leave. But I'm telling you now, just in case you want to use me in the next 6 months a different way. And so he said, well, don't say anything to anybody because they're going to be upset. Then I said, well, I'm a man of integrity. I can't just lie to people. He said, well, let me tell him. And he came back on that Friday and said, they were all pleased with your work so far and they made their money back. So they said, whenever you want to leave, you can leave. I quit that Monday. So it's Friday. I was out Monday. So I guess 2 weeks later, I was like, man, what did I do? Because I was starting missing my paycheck.
Right.
So yeah, now that was full-time entrepreneur from that point forward.
So I love that. A few parts of that story. First, that golf brought you, some opportunities. So now your passions of horses and golf have both brought you some serious opportunities in your life. 2, that you recognize the value that you had to the company and used it in your bargaining chip to get moved to Atlanta. Mm-hmm. But also the fact that you were maintaining a corporate job while pursuing your passion on the side. So let's go back a little bit and talk about, when did the passion for fashion really develop within you, and how did you get started dabbling in it?
Right. In high school, my father and my grandfather have always been like immaculate dressers, well known. Like my father's Dominican, 100% Dominican, but he's a really fly guy. If you met him, he's
I have met him.
Really, yeah, he's got swagger on 10,000. And my grandfather, same way. So they all both would have these suits made. And, I loved wearing their clothes. I would get clothes from them. I remember my 21st birthday, my father had a suit I kind of jacked from him, a double-breasted silk sharkskin suit. I wore it to my 21st birthday with an ascot. I went to the club, man, and the boys in D.C. wasn't used to seeing guys that fly. So it was that experience with them. Going through high school, I always liked to dress nice. I wore sport coats. Throughout college, I wore suits. Carried a briefcase. You got a backpack. I'm carrying a briefcase with a suit. I was a businessman. Even in high school, going to school, I had my lawn service. I had a photography business. I'm the first person that I know personally that had a cell phone, a mobile phone. I got my first cell phone in 1986. I had it in my car. Only other people I knew that had a cell phone were drug dealers. And I wasn't a drug dealer. I had a legitimate business. So, but I had a passion for business. And, I read like the Wall Street Journal regularly, business pages of the Washington Post daily. And, I just immersed myself in business stuff. So, so I didn't know that I studied business, but my opportunity to be in the clothing business came probably my 4th year working for Pillsbury. I had a good friend of mine who he and I used to love shopping. I mean, we wore suits and real competitive. Like I got a suit nicer than your suit type of thing. And he ended up got a job working for custom clothing and making suits. And at that point, I couldn't compete anymore because the suits he had was just, nothing in the store could compete with the stuff he was having made. So I ended up have my suits made. I'm probably, in my 25, 26 years old, but I'm wearing custom-made suits. I used to love having my name in it. And, nothing else would do. That's what I liked. And so he decided to leave that company and asked me to partner with him. So we started John Michael Menswear. So his name was John Gatlin. John, God rest his soul, passed away about 2 years ago. But he and I started in the business. He taught me a lot about, fitting and measuring and fabrics and things. And that was the start I needed to help me, matriculate through and begin, the educational part of it is just continuous. You always learn. And so I've been, constantly going to shows, meeting people, reading, learn as much as I can about fashion, even to this day. So that's never stopped. It's been 30 years now. So that's pretty much how I got my start in fashion.
And if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, Miguel is definitely the best dressed man I know. And so check out the video version so you can see how clean he is today. But so you have the endeavor with your partner, and you are given you have the opportunity to leave Marriott, and you take full advantage of that right away. But then, as you said, that paycheck come up missing 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
And so a different reality hits you in the face.
Yeah, different reality, but some new opportunities too. So for 2 years, I kind of was in a kind of crazy space. I wouldn't have enough business to really sustain me. But my passion for golf was through the roof at this point too. And I'm gonna mention his name. My boy Mark, who you interviewed, also started playing a lot of golf then. So Mark and I used to play a lot of golf. And he and a bunch of other guys I would play with, but nonetheless, they started gambling. And as a result, I would win enough money to sustain me for 2 years playing golf.
So they must not play that good.
They weren't good at all back then, but, it was a bunch of guys that, was really getting into golf then. I think, this was the era. Remember, Tiger Woods really started getting in the 90s, which is the same time I started playing golf. But then This is in the early 2000s, so now we all kind of really into the game. You know, I joined the club. I was the first black member at Bridge Mill Athletic Club, and so I started playing there all the time. And so golf was something that really helped to sustain me for the 2 years, just playing with people. But it also introduced me to a lot of guys who could buy suits. So, you know, I knew I couldn't sustain a business of golf. So I would really start getting serious about how am I going to build this business. And just started a process of really, you know, put my sales knowledge into place to try to really build and grow.
And so you start the business, and that one lasted for how long? Because you've had a few iterations of...
So it was, that was executive clothing. When I moved to Atlanta and I quit my job, and so I started my own company called Executive Clothing. I wanted a brand I felt would be, you know, I didn't want to put a black face on it. I didn't want a black name. I wanted something that could do business with everybody. But, you know, ultimately I had my, you know, most of my clients were still black, and I did that for a total of 11 years. But midway, probably in 2005, 2004, 2005, I bought a building in 2003 in Buckhead on Piedmont Road. And it was a multi-use building. I had my shop downstairs and I had space up top. So what I started doing was I had a lot of guys come to Atlanta. I could do your suit, but I could also lease you out the upstairs to it, right? And, you know, coming from a hotel background, this was kind of, you know, something I still had a passion for too. And I kind of created the first Airbnbs before it was Airbnb, if you will. That's what a lot of guys would tell you. So that got popular to the extent that I bought it was a townhome, but it was 4 units. So over the next few years, I ended up acquiring all 4 units and using them for the purpose of creating a hotel brand, a hospitality business called Executive Boutique Suites, which we, instead of renting a room, just like you do with Airbnb, we rented you a house. But it was more luxury oriented, so we also had a lot of services that you could get, like chefs, you know, we had cleaning staff, we had concierge, that type of thing. So it was an elevated experience, but very private too. So we catered to, you know, guys who, a lot of celebrities who wanted privacy and be right in the city. So I did that, but it took a lot of money, and I was building it with the expectation that I would raise money for it at some point to be able to build it out and scale it. And that's when the crash happened, probably in 2009. And, you know, I held on, not realizing that it wasn't going to get any better anytime soon. It was going to get worse. So in the process, I'm taking money from the clothing business to help fund the hotel part of it. So prior to that, you know, I'm getting $400 or $500 a night for my room, my suites. And when this happened, Airbnb kicked in. People started renting houses out for $100 a night. Hotel rooms went down. No one was getting my places, and I couldn't sustain them for the prices that I had them. So I ultimately had to file bankruptcy, and I messed up 2 businesses in the process of trying to save one. So that was a big lesson for me.
And that was where your book picked up, Peace Over Everything. And I also know that prior to that time, you had started a family, right?
Right.
So you were married and had children. What was it like trying to sustain yourself and take care of other people off of an entrepreneurial endeavor, the challenges that come with being an entrepreneur and being a family man at the same time?
Well, it's tough enough as it is, but my lifestyle didn't help either. Just being frank, that you know, I had a wife and I had kids, but you know, I spent a lot of time on the streets. You know, and you know, Atlanta can, coming from North Carolina, and I lived in North Carolina, but then moving to Atlanta, it was like, you can get into just the whole environment here, going out all the time. There's always parties. There's always something happening. You can justify it through, for the purpose of business. I need to meet people. I need to do, and I did that, but it kept me away from home a lot and away from my kids, and I definitely regret that I didn't spend more time with my kids growing up. But I ultimately, made the process of taking care of everybody, doing what I need to do, tougher because I had cars, I had boat, I had lifestyle, so it was one in which required a lot of money to sustain. And when the business started really suffering, just slowly stuff just started having to get rid of and downsize and move. It was just a gradual, long, lengthy process.
So that brings you to one, the crash happens in '08. You got the scenario and situation with your family not necessarily being on the best footing.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the real estate goes down, which leads you to filing bankruptcy, and that's a common theme I see on this show. Is '08 took a toll on a lot of the entrepreneurs that were in business at that time. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about your book and reading about your story and whatnot was two things. The first was your level of accountability for what led you to where you are at that moment in time. Your almost lowest moment. I think maybe when the IRS gets involved, it gets a little lower. But you took accountability for no matter what the situation and circumstances were.
Right.
It's on you. That's the first thing. But the second thing was I saw that a lot of relationships is what helped you come out of that moment, which I think is the spirit of your generosity, which I've experienced over the years as well. And I want to kind of dive into that moment in 2011 when you're kind of hitting the bottom, and let's pick it up where the IRS gives you a call.
Well, let me say this, that because I think what's significant too is that, I had to reach a place where I realized that I never saw myself here. Like, everything I've done up to now has been successful. Everything has been good, Even in the midst of, making mistakes, I've still been able to still grow and still survive and so forth. And so now for the first time I'm at a place where I'm literally looking at myself and saying, man, I've lost everything. I invested since I was 22 years old. I bought my first house when I was 23. In every company I worked for, I was a part of the investment plan, and I did the stock options, and so I sacrificed to do these things. I mean, I remember when I bought my first house, I didn't have money for a refrigerator, but I said, I'm going to save my money till I get and buy a refrigerator. I didn't want to do credit. I was just such a beast at just discipline, saving, and investing. So I bought another house when I was 27. And, so I was used to having and growing and so forth. So now here I am at 44 years old and I have nothing. I've lost every home. I had 7 houses. I lost every single one of them. I think that, to understand the situation with IRS, you got to understand this, where I came from financially, where I was, having nice cars, having boats, having, Rolexes, and so forth, all this stuff. And so the change happened when I realized that I was living a lie. That was the first step in changing and realizing that all the problems I was having was a result of my own doing. That, the business failed because of my lack of focus in the streets, perhaps. Taking money from a good business, trying to put into a bad business, not realizing, recognizing the economic situation that we're in. It's multiple things, and then even in my marriage, realizing that I've been unfaithful, and that if I really want to be better and have assuming that at 44 years old that half of my life was probably over, and if I want to have a better second half, I need to make significant changes to my life immediately. Okay, and so living in that lie of, with my wife and kids and everything, it meant for me just to be honest and to accept my responsibilities at that point and just say, am I going to be a good husband? And I realized that, I had never been faithful, ever. And the chances of me becoming faithful today is zero. So let me just be honest with her about where I am and move forward. And so that's what I did. And, we ended up getting divorced. But I still took care of my kids, took care of her, throughout that process. And it was very tough for them, seeing me in a lot of negative ways. And that was painful. But then on top of all that, I get the letter from the IRS saying, hey, 2009, you made $1 million. And we need to, your taxes weren't right, whatever. So they audited me. But prior to them auditing me, all my records got destroyed in a flood. In one of my houses that I had them in a garage, and then the garage got flooded. My office got flooded, and everything was just gone. So when they came, I didn't have any records. So, I got bank statements. I have, email stuff. But, back then, I didn't really have stuff documented like that. So they said, basically you owe $1 million because, one, you made $1 million, but you have no write-offs. So basically that $1 million is all income to you. Then, so that's $300-some thousand, 33%, whatever it was. And then on top of that, you had tax, you had penalties and interest and all that stuff. Man, by the end of it all, I owed $1 million. So, so that was very deflating because it robbed me of a lot of hope. Before that, I was, still hopeful that I have a bright future. I can, work my way out of this. But now you're telling me that, you're going to take my next $1 million on top of, I never be able to recover from this. I can't catch up with the rate of penalties and interest and all that type of stuff. So it was disturbing.
So I take away that the IRS should wear a ski mask when they reach out because they definitely coming in robbing.
Is organized crime.
Right.
Period, brother. When they come, you want them. You rather the mafia come than they come.
Right.
They ain't playing, and they got access to everything, and they can rob you of your future. So that was the most, painful. That was a painful process to go through.
So that's what I would think would have been the lowest point at that moment. What you just said, your family is coming apart, your business is coming apart. The IRS wants money from you, but it's also the point where you said, I'm gonna adopt a new strategy going forward for how I'm gonna get out of this situation and become the success that I want to be again. What plan did you put in place?
Well, I was God showed me something in the wedding space. I was still first and foremost, I had to decide on what I wanted to do, and I'm sitting there thinking, right now I got a clean slate. I have nothing and I can do whatever I want to do. So let me recreate myself and become whoever it is that I choose to be now. And I really enjoyed, and this is significant. I think up to that point, the clothing business was always a bridge to something else. So while I dipped and dabbled in other things such as the hotel business, and I always looked at the clothing was just something I was doing now. It wasn't something that I really was committed to doing long term. So in this process, I said, I need to commit myself to something long term. And so I decided that fashion was going to be it. And, I said that I wanted to be a famous fashion designer. That's what I said. And I looked at, people like Ralph Lauren and Tom Ford and, how did these guys elevate to that level? And the common narrative between them was that they kind of all entered into fashion in a space in which they owned. Ralph Lauren took off significantly from the polo shirt, right? I don't know that anybody really heard of Ralph Lauren before he came with the polo, that little horse on there. And that's what put him on the map. Calvin Klein with the jeans. So I said, I need to identify a space in fashion that I can make a name in. And I looked at a couple different things that I thought were opportunities, but the thing that stood out most and I thought had the greatest opportunity was wedding space for men. At the time, women had all these great designers, Vera Wang and so forth, that did these beautiful gowns, but no one did anything special for grooms or men when it came to, formal attire. So I created the Miguel Wilson Wedding Collection for men. And I had a tagline, because it's his day too. And started designing some really unique, beautiful tuxedos. And everybody just kind of took off, It was this lady who had a bridal boutique inside Lenox Mall. And she had a consortium of wedding professionals in this one space. So if you can go there and get your planner, you can go get your videographer, photographer, cake people, whatever. I was a tuxedo guy in this space. And I had put a tuxedo in the window. My first client that bought a tuxedo, I did a silk white jacket, ivory jacket with black lapels. And first client to come buy that jacket out the window was a guy by the name of Joseph Morgan. And he was on the TV show Vampire Diaries. He was the vampire. And he married one of the ladies from the TV show Friends. No, it wasn't Friends. It was the three girls, Tracy Ellis Ross, she was in the show, and it was three girls. She was one of the girls in the show. But he bought that jacket, the tuxedo from me, $2,200, and that sealed the deal for me. I knew I was wanting something with these tuxedos, and that's what enabled me to establish myself, a name for myself in a space that nobody was really doing anything.
And so you decide that you're going to focus and hone in on custom men's clothing, especially in the wedding space and the wedding environment. And then how did you end up, because you're still at a low point financially, how did you end up in one of the most prestigious addresses in Atlanta in Phipps Plaza?
So let me back up and tell you this part. I stopped doing suits. I focused 100% on tuxedos. I wanted to be the tuxedo guy. And the young lady who was in Lenox, she moved her whole business over to Phipps Plaza. So I was a part of that move in that consortium there. And while there, working one day, a good friend of mine who I kind of grew up with, boxing and stuff. His name, he lives here now, is Donald Woodard, attorney. And he had a law firm across the street. He worked at a law firm across the street, and Donald and I grew up in the DMV area together. So I knew him for a long time. I was like, Woodard, man, I got some serious problems. I just got a letter from them, and they wanted to meet with me, and it was just the stress was like killing me. And so I said, man, I need some help. And he walked in, I said, I need an attorney. So he said, I got just the guy for you. And probably he went back to his office. Within 15 minutes, I had a phone call. He said, come on over across the street. I walked over to his office, and he introduced me to a little short white Jewish guy named Paul Spazzeri. Paul, I told him my story, and he said, you're going to feel great when you leave here today. and that stuck with me, and it shows you, I think, too, just the level of, unpeace I had. He said, you're going to feel great when you leave here today. And he began to explain to me a story of a guy who the IRS was going after. He had a fire, and his name was Cohen, Cohen. And Mr. Cohen, and I think this happened in the 1800s when Mr. Cohen had a fire. The IRS said, you owe us all this money for taxes. And he took him to court, and the judge said, you can't take advantage of this man because of his, problem. So basically, sir, how much did you make? We'll base it off what you said you made, and that's what they came up with. And so that was named the Cohen Rule. And he said, you're going to fall under the Cohen Rule because you had a natural catastrophe, a flood. And so being the gangsters that they are, the IRS, they, wouldn't accept that as a ruling. But so he said, we may end up having to go to court, which would be very expensive. And by the grace of God, the IRS has a mediation section. So once you get to a point where the agents don't want to negotiate or go down, they were very angry with me for getting legal counsel. Okay. These people took me losing my life, me losing everything, very personal. They weren't losing anything, but they were angry with me for getting fair representation. That to me struck me. I never forget just that energy that they gave me, angry with me for getting help. And so from there, Paul said that, with the mediator, she accepted the Cohen Rule. And through that process, it lowered my tax bill from $1 million down to like 70-something thousand.
God is good.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, amazingly.
And so you got the IRS off your back at that point. You are now in Phipps Plaza. Mm-hmm. You are focused 100% on tuxedos. Mm-hmm. What is allowing the business to do well and expand to multiple locations?
So back up, I'm in that space with the consortium, whatever, and I had a vision of having a store, and God just gave me a vision. They made, think about it, you could possibly have a store here one day. And it was far-fetched because my credit was terrible and I ain't had any money. But, you got a dream. And I just inquiring and wanting to know what it would take to get in there, called and asked, and they said, we'll have somebody call you. And probably nobody called for about 3 weeks. And I never forget, I was home at the time and somebody called me and said, you inquired about us, getting in the mall. And I have a space here that I'd like to talk to you about, da-da-da. And she called me over, and I remember calling my father and saying, man, I want you to come to this meeting with me. So we go over to, in the office for Phipps is in Lenox. So I went to the office there, and sat down, and she's like, well, I got this small space. There's no AC or heat. There's no bathroom. And it's like 600 square feet. And I do it for you for $2,000. I'm like, okay. Now, I'm paying a significant amount to be in the other space. And so this was like, okay, I was surprised that 2,000 was the number. I said, sure, I'll take it. She put a contract in front of me. She said, sign here. Now, I'm going there thinking we're going to talk about, and I'm learning about what it would take to be in here. And I left that meeting with keys. And I attribute that 1,000% to the changes I made in my life and trying to be right and trying to do good and trying to be honest and praying and asking God for forgiveness for my past sins and all the stuff. And I just think that led me to this day of being getting something outside of the normal expectations. Okay, because when you getting real estate of this magnitude, usually they want to see financials. Usually they want deposits. Usually they want a whole lot of stuff. They want to see your credit. Had she asked me for any of that, I would have immediately failed. And when I left, I'm thinking, man, she just made a mistake. I got a feeling she's gonna call me back and say, oh yeah, by the way, I forgot to get your bank statement. So I forgot to get your credit. Never called back. And through God's good grace and mercy, worked out where I got that store, that small little store, and gave me a vision and also gave me the resources within a month to finish it out. And it was beautiful.
And so that's at Phipps. That's your first location. And then before you expanded, what was your second location?
DC.
DC.
Oh, you know what? Let me back up, because really I had a location in Miami.
Right.
For that.
Right.
And I was at a wedding. I did a wedding in Miami. I met a fraternity brother. I'm a Kappa. I met a fraternity brother at the Conclave in 2011. He was getting married. And he said, I'm going to get you to do my wedding. And he lived in, what island was that? The island they do all the tax breaks and stuff.
Cayman Islands.
Cayman Islands. There you go. I knew you would know. I knew you would know. So the Cayman Islands, that's where his wedding was going to be. And I went down there, did the wedding, had to do all his groomsmen, groom, everybody. Well, I met this guy. He did the bride's clothes. And he's Cuban. And he had a store in Coral Gables in Miami on Miracle Mile. At the time, I didn't know about Coral Gables, nor did I know about Miracle Mile, any of that. But this was the most premier wedding destination for wedding attire probably in the country. Beautiful. And a few years later, I visited his store, and he was just so nice, and we just stayed in touch. So when I was going through a lot of things and I came with this vision for this new concept, the Miguel Wilson Wedding Collection, I called him and asked him, could I put some jackets in some of his windows? And he's like, sure, Miguel, come on. I go down there and put a jacket in the window. Next thing I know, people calling. So I would go to Miami every month to work out right out of his store, just taking orders, and I would pay him a percentage of each deal I did. So it was just a great situation. I did that for years. I went to Miami once a month for about 8 years straight, doing weddings, working out of his shop. So I had that, and now I had the location in Phipps Plaza. So I remember my father saying to me, man, you need to put some suits in the window. Because, people need to know you could be selling more clothes. Everybody don't want a tuxedo. Everybody's not getting married. And I remember God just told me, don't move. Keep those tuxedos in the windows. And what ultimately happened was that all of the places that sold suits in Phipps Plaza, you have Saks, you have Gucci, you have Nordstrom's, you have, Tom Ford. It's just a bunch of suit places, And Boss, Hugo Boss. All those guys was when somebody came in and said, I want a tuxedo, they all sent them to me. So I wasn't competition to them for suits, and I was doing something different. So that helped build and grow the brand so much faster. And I ended up doing, I had done Peter and Cynthia's wedding from the Housewives before things fell apart. But this time around, Peter sent Todd and Candy to me to do their wedding. So I'm on the Housewives and just I think the slogan, and I'll tell you this is critical for me, is that the timing. When I did the executive boutique suites, the timing was bad. It was a great concept, great idea, would have blown up most any other time. But the timing was bad with the real estate market declining like it did and having to crash. But now I had perfect timing because social media was taking off, and I just kind of immersed myself in trying to learn the social media stuff and just start posting pictures of clothing and posting, about, because it's his day too. And I did a lot of posts all around weddings and things, and women who did their research on weddings, I kept popping up. And so everybody started sending their grooms to me.
And you have a relatively large social media following, which I attribute, though, also not just to you studying the social media methods and whatnot, but you're very authentic in what you talk about, and it's as if you're just having a conversation with, the people who are following you, and I think it resonates well with them. One of the stories I want you to touch on, because it resonated well with me, was you had recently, or at that point in time, got a contract with Morehouse to do the blazers for the young men entering the school. And you contracted out of the country to supply those blazers. And then the next year you ran into a bit of a snafu. Tell me a little bit about that incident.
So I had a guy working for me at the time, and we got the contract to do the blazers for Morehouse. What they were doing is they would do all blazers for all entering freshmen. And so the gentleman I had working for me, I took him to China with me. I made him part of the process of identifying the manufacturer and all that stuff. So he went there with me, and we did a deal, went through everything, so forth. But the next year, he ends up contacting my manufacturer to do the deal without me. And my manufacturer called me because he and I had developed a really good relationship. He said, hey, your guy is called us to do the jackets, but, he's not doing it with you. And the question is, do you want us to proceed with this or not? Because we won't do it if you say don't. And I told him, go ahead and do it. I just never wanted to be, I just wanted good energy around myself all the time. And I don't want to be a problem for someone. I don't want to be the one responsible for your failure, for your not being able to do something. I'm not getting in the way of anybody or anything. And I remember, at the time, people that I had on my team were very upset with me, thinking, man, you can't believe you let him do that, da-da-da. But, later that year, same year, he did the jackets, but later that year, my manufacturer called me and said, hey, are you in touch with the gentleman? Because he's not returning our calls and his jackets are ready for delivery. And I said, I knew immediately he got money problems, because the only reason he's not returning the call because he can't pay for them. So he's probably trying to figure out how he's going to do this. But I just, God gave me another vision. He said, look, I just called Morehouse. I called my guy who I did jackets for the previous year, and I just said, hey, And his answer machine came on. He didn't even answer. I said, "Hey, it's Miguel. I'm just checking with you guys, make sure everything all right, and just make sure you're good." Hung up. Man, 3 minutes later, he was calling me back. He said, "Man, can you help us get our jackets?" Because the other guy wasn't coming through, and I guess he was, not being honest about the situation, but whatever. But I said, "I can help you." And he was like, "Well, can you have?" So I called my guy and found out how much was owed on the bill, and I let them know what was owed on the bill, and it was like, "Well, can you get them to ship the jackets?" And we'll send them the money after we get the jacket. I said, "No, you don't do business like that." He said, "You send him his money, and I'll make sure you get your jackets." And that's what happened. They got the jackets. So I helped them that year. So the following year, they did a 3-year contract, and they gave it to me to do the jackets from that point forward. Now, I did probably 2 years of the contract, and they stopped doing it for the freshmen altogether because they just didn't see the value in doing it for the freshmen at that point. So, but I ended up getting the contract back.
And see, that story resonates well with me because, one, I'd have been in your ear too saying you crazy for letting that contract go through with the other guy. But it's just, again, a testament to how you decided to be a different person in the second half of your life and really live into that energy. And you was like, look, just because he's doing you wrong doesn't mean you have to return the favor.
Right.
And then it still worked out for you in the long run because you stayed true to who you wanted to be. And I think that in business, we get presented with numerous challenges and opportunities to decide who we want to be. And if we haven't made up our mind ahead of time, that's when we get into predicaments, right?
Yeah, you can be lulled to be who you don't intend to be. You gotta know who you are and what you want to do and what you want to do. And for me, I am a person that leaves revenge to God. Period. I'm not going to be the guy to go after you for wronging me. And what I found is time after time after time after time, God has always restored me to a place better than I could have had I acted on my own. Each time. So just as a way of life now, it's not even questionable, You can do me however you want to, but I'll just let God handle you. And that seemed to be just a good way for me to operate in life.
And so business is going well. You've gotten to 4 stores, Miami, DC, New York, what have you. And that kind of brings me back to this full circle. You've started to get into events more. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, you have the Polo Classic, which again, I'm just impressed because you don't see a lot of Black people attending an event like that. Number one, attending it, but then to be the host, right? And I've been to your Polo Classic, so I see the grandeur with which you present it and the level of quality that you put into it and the people that you want associated with the product. It's a grand vision, right? And it wasn't easy getting it off the ground. But tell me more about what made you think, I'm doing fashion, I'm doing well, my life is getting back on track now, but I still have this love for horses, I still have this love for polo. How do I combine the two and make it a success?
So, a couple things. One, you got to go back. My son was riding horses. He had the same passion I had as a kid. It's crazy. I mean, he just slept, ate, drank horses. And little Miguel, when he was at a place, he's a straight A student. He was doing really well in school, and he's like, "Dad, I want to ride at another level." And at this time, I'm going through all that I'm going through, and I don't have the money for him to do what he deserved. And it broke my heart that I couldn't buy him a horse, that I couldn't enable him to ride at the level he potentially could. But, I said, listen, Dad can't afford to do this, but there's always more than one way to skin a cow, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start a foundation that will help you ride. Where I believe that there's a lot of grandmas out there, like the great grandmother I had, that will pay $5 a month to get a little kid like you, black kid like you on a horse. But I said this has to be bigger than you, though. It can't be just about you. It's got to be about other kids that we helping. So in that conversation, and I'll tell you this, we rode all the way to Virginia, to Salamander, Kathy Hughes' place, and rode all the way up there from Atlanta in hopes of just having a conversation with her, just in hopes of meeting her, because I knew her daughter rode horses, and they were big in horses. And when we were there, we sat in that lobby for hours and never could get her in front of her. You know, I saw the disappointment in his face, his eyes, you know, and just riding back, you know, that's when I said, you know, I came with that idea about starting a foundation. And he was still defeated because he's like, Dad, that's not, none of the kids do it that way. You know, all his white friends were, you know, had access to stuff. That just not going to work. So I'm trying to pick his spirit. I'm trying to give him hope, trying to let him feel something. And he was just defeated, man. And that was a very painful moment for me. But I said, I got to make this work for him. And so we created Ride to the Olympics. And we named it Ride to the Olympics because there had never been an African-American to ride in the Olympics. And at the time, that was his dream, to potentially ride in the United States Olympic team. And so what happened is a few people started sending money in. And money started coming in here and there for him to ride. And he was like, I said, and it was probably one of the best feelings ever to see him say, I get it now. I see it. He was the chairman of the foundation. We did events with other kids. He was actually, you probably can Google it, but it was a Fox News, I think, story. They did a story on him. We did it. We had all the kids from Boys and Girls Clubs come out to the barn. He did a whole event around them there. We started this whole thing called Day at the Barn, where we bring a bunch of kids to the barn and we just expose them. And you know, just the power of giving, man. He was just, you know, loved it. And ultimately, though, for him, he ended up getting a job riding horses at different barns in Texas. Became a really big rider. He rode nationally for different trainers. And they burnt him out because he was riding, you know, 10 horses a day. So by the time he got to college, he's like, I'm done riding. He didn't want to ride anymore. But that's how the foundation got started. And so when one day I was playing polo, and I was putting my horse back from playing, and his brother, Jaleel, his name, he worked at that barn as a farmhand. And he stopped me. He said, man, were you riding? Were you playing? I said, yeah. He said, man, I've been here 6 years. I ain't never seen a black guy here riding. And it hit me that I'm doing something that's very unique. Honestly, and it sounds crazy to me, it sounds that I really didn't really think about it like that before. But I'm like, man, you're doing something that black people don't have access to, don't have opportunity to see. And when we do it, it's always in a white environment, white culture. So in that moment, talking to him, I thought about, I can incorporate this as a way to raise money for the foundation. And I'm going to do something different. I'm going to add a fashion show to it. So I started the Atlanta Fashion and Polo Classic. That's how it got started. A conversation with a brother who worked on a farm. Lord knows how little he made. I still talk to him to this day. He's up in Philadelphia now, but, you know, I always give him credit for birthing that idea with me.
Well, that's a tremendous event. I've had the pleasure of attending. It's always well received, and a lot of positive things and comments come out of it. So I'm glad that you did eventually realize that you were doing something unique that needed some attention caused to it, brought to it. And so before we get out of here, I want to mention your book, Peace Over Everything. I know you got a new book that you're working on, and we'll bring you back to talk about that in the future. But I want the listeners to make sure they pick up a copy of your book so they can hear all the more details of your tremendous story and whatnot. And then before we leave, I always ask my guests to let the listeners know if they could do it all over again and what the next generation of entrepreneurs should take into mind when considering that leap into business for themselves. What would you say to give them the business?
So, as far as myself, what would I do differently? Honestly, I don't know that I do anything differently. I think that I'm happy with the results, the learnings, the peace, you know. So the book, Peace Over Everything, deals with prioritizing your peace over money, over other things that can distract you from your purpose in life. Sometimes we make decisions that have long-term effects. So you want to make sure that those decisions you make don't rob you of your ability to sleep at night or your ability to, relax and not worry. I always do it in reference to kids. I talk to high school kids a lot, and I say, listen, if you all having sex and you have sex unprotected, you just gave away your peace, okay? Because now you got to be worried about whether you caught something. You have to be worried about whether you got her pregnant, okay? For the next however much time it takes, you just lost all your peace, your ability to relax. So I put it in that frame because I think most of us can relate to that. But at the end of the day, as an adult, it gets much more deeper and a lot more problems we could create for ourselves. A friend of mine told me a long time ago, Orlando Lynch from Atlanta Peach Movers. He told me a long time ago, he said, Miguel, 90% of the problems we have are the problems we create ourselves. And those problems are the ones that rob us of our peace. The problems we don't control, you can't control it. So why worry about it? But when you create it yourself, that's when it's problematic, most problematic. Entrepreneurs, what would I tell you? I think that a lot of times people enter into entrepreneurship not as prepared as they should be. And one of the areas I think that, people see ideas. They say, okay, you got this. Okay, I want to do this or do that. But very few people come up with concepts and ideas that separate them and differentiate them from the competition. Enter into a business with the mindset that I want to do it in a way that will resonate with people differently than the way everybody else does it. That was key to my success in being able to survive even to this day in a mall where there's Versace, there's Gucci, there's Tom Ford, there's Hermes, there's Dior, all these brands selling things. I'm on the second floor. People have to walk past these places, and my product isn't cheap either. So why are you going to come to me? Because I'm doing something unique and different and special, right? So you have to be able to separate yourself in business through your product and definitely through the service.
I love it. Well, as I mentioned, make sure you pick up the book, Peace Over Everything. Miguel, I've enjoyed having this conversation with you. I'm glad that we finally were able to sit down and put it on tape so that others can hear the story that you have and get to know you as I've gotten to know you. Thank you for giving them the business.
Thank you, my brother. God bless you.